Welcome back to the Word for the Valley podcast, where we listen to sermons from Pastor Mike's in-depth teaching through the book of Matthew. And in today's study, we meet a Canaanite woman, a Gentile from the region of Tyre and Sidon, who becomes one of the clearest pictures of what genuine faith looks like. And in this episode, we'll explore how Jesus engages this woman, why her persistence matters, and how her story reveals the way Jesus still invites anyone, regardless of background, tradition, or status, to come directly to him in faith. Let's follow along with Pastor Mike in chapter 15, verse 21.
In this chapter, there's a turn, there's a transition that's beginning to happen as Jesus is being confronted by the religious leaders. And the transition is that the current culture of the day, the religious system of the day, the Jewish mindset of the day isn't fitting anymore with what they see in Jesus. And rather than kind of adopting Jesus' viewpoint on it, rather than looking at Jesus and saying, hey, teach us, we need to learn your ways above ours, they actually try to impress their ways on Christ. Last week we saw in verse 2 of chapter 15 that the scribes and Pharisees came to Jesus and said, why do you transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. Now, that was just one example that they're throwing out in regards to the washing of the hands, the ceremonial washing of the hands. But the thing that they're concerned about primarily is that Jesus is not playing their game. He's not working according to their traditions. He's not functioning according to their standards, their structures, their stereotypes of that day. He's not playing in that field. He's not working in that way. And he comes along and he says to them, listen, you guys have made the word of God of no effect by your traditions. Basically, your traditions are nonsense to me if they confront the word of God. I have no regard for them. And just chooses to function outside of that entirely. Just almost in some ways, just ignoring everything that they laid out in front of him. To the degree where he says to his disciples in verse 14, let them alone. They're blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. This is hard for us if we don't understand this context. And we can't put ourselves in the shoes of a non-religious Jewish person in this time. If we can't put ourselves in those shoes, it's really hard for us to understand the scope and gravity of what Jesus is actually doing here. He is disregarding thousands of years of Jewish kind of tradition and history and the emphasis of what that would be, and then everything that gets connected to it, the hope of the blessing of God, the hope of the presence of God, the hope of the deliverance of everything that gets connected to that. Jesus is disregarding and saying, listen, we're actually going right to God himself. We're disregarding your traditions, and we're disregarding even the leaders of those traditional practices. Just leave them alone, he says. But you instead, come, you follow me, you obey, you walk in this way. Now, in some ways, as we move to verse 21, Jesus is going to give us a picture of that principle in the faith and this interaction here with this Syrophoenician woman. She's a Canaanite, it tells us in verse 22. She's from the region of Tyre and Sidon. She's Lebanese. So she's a Gentile. She's a non-Jew. All right? And she's going to interact now with Jesus. And how he works with her is an indicator then, by and large, how he is going to work with all of us as well. It says in verse 21, then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon located about 50 miles north of Galilee. This is in the area of Lebanon. The question that a lot of the commentators have is, did he go to the border of Tyre and Sidon? Did he go to the border of the Gentile territory and just kind of stay there? And she comes to him in Jewish territory? Or does he go all the way into Gentile territory and interact with her there? To me, I don't care about such nonsense in regards to what the logistics of those kinds of things are. It's the interpersonal relationship with the woman that's significant. Where this takes place, it doesn't much matter, really, because the concept is the same. That he's going to relate, he's going to work with, he's going to dialogue with, and ultimately then he's going to bless and heal this woman who comes to him ultimately in faith. And he's willing to do that. Now, clearly a Gentile woman, and she's coming to him there in that region, somewhere around Tyre and Sidon. Now, verse 22, and behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region, so that's where she's grown up, lived, right? That's who she is. Came from that region and cried out to him, saying, now, Mark tells us that the disciples and Jesus are in a house. This is not in a public sphere, okay? Which is important in the dialogue here because it can be really, I think, easy to misunderstand how Jesus is working with this woman and the disciples at the same time in the same context, which a home environment, a one-room environment kind of changes the dynamic here. At least it does in my understanding, okay? They're in a house. She knocks on the door, and she is allowed to come in to their house, right? Which, when you get to the book of Acts, chapter 10, you realize this is a really significant thing, right? Peter wasn't even sure that he could go into the Gentile man's house without defiling himself and all of the considerations and concerns there. But they bring her in. They bring her into the house that they're staying in. Now look, she says, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Now obviously what drives her to make this effort to come to Jesus, knowing if he is like any other Jewish rabbi. If he was one of the scribes and Pharisees, how would she be treated? She would be disregarded. She'd be run out of the house. They would have no concern for her need, for her request. Completely ignored, and merely because she was a Gentile. And then more ignored because she was a woman Gentile. A woman Gentile with a need? No way. She comes, though, despite all of that kind of cultural tradition, all of that challenge to this, she comes because her daughter is severely demon-possessed. Now, parents, you may think that your child is demon-possessed. That's just normal. By and large. Every kid has his moments, right? You are out of your mind. You are out of my mind. You are out of the universe. What's going on with you, right? That's normal. That's natural, all right? Then you have a child who ends up kind of dealing with stuff differently, right? Dealing with relationships differently, dealing with maybe a disability, a challenge. Certain children have challenges that are unique to them, right? That's an additional challenge then in parenting and in caring for a child, right? Everybody has challenges. Those are additional challenges. But then, every now and then, you have a child that is completely, in some ways, controlled by an outside force. They have no ability to determine for themselves right and wrong, good and bad. All they are is, in some ways, threatening to hurt themselves, hurt others, all of the time. And that parent very quickly goes from being a parent to a supervisor, where all that they are trying to do in some ways is just prevent this child from really permanently hurting themselves. You're trying to guard against a force, fight against a force you can't see, you can't touch, you have no power over at all. But here you are trying to protect your child, trying to care for your child. This is a parent who is completely out of control. Out of control, meaning they have no power to change what needs to be changed in this person's life, this child's life at all. But desiring for that greatly, wanting this child to be safe. This in some ways is the height, and I believe probably, of desperation. A parent who looks at a child, because you can't say, hey, do this better, do this differently. You can't teach them, you can't instruct. They have no power over themselves. You can't get them outside of the environment. You can't change their environment. Let's just go here. Let's do this. Let's be here. This is a safe place for you. You're just going to stay at home. This is a safe place. You can't do that here. None of that is effectual. None of that is beneficial. Because this force is with them at all points and times, and this mother has no power over it at all. Again, this is desperate. And this is what drives her to come to Jesus. This desperation, this need that can't be addressed anywhere else, where she hears word or rumor of what Jesus has been doing in Israeli territory, in Jewish territory. Now he's close to her, close enough where she can come, right? Maybe she gets 15 minutes outside of the house away from her daughter, right? She can come and plead, his mercy on her daughter. Now, the challenge for her is she has heard somewhat about Jesus. She's just not yet met him for herself. She's heard kind of by the hearing of the ear, right? I love that in Job, right? I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you and I repent in dust and ashes. It's one thing to hear about God. It's another thing altogether to actually have met him. And here she comes to him and says, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. Now you can tell, and Edersheim goes on and on about this in the commentary, but you can tell that she doesn't really know who he is yet because she relates to him along the wrong lines. She's a Canaanite. She's a Gentile, right? She's not a Jew, but she approaches him as if she was. She uses the Jewish phrase, Son of David, which has no bearing on her. It's true about Jesus. It's certainly true. But it has no bearing on her life at all. She's not a son of David. She's not a daughter of David. This is not her title to claim, to use. It is true about Jesus, but it doesn't match what's going on in her heart or in her life at this particular time. It's the right words. Just doesn't have the full depth of meaning that it needs to have. Some people try to relate to Jesus in the right way, right? It's funny. Sometimes it's funny to me, I guess, maybe in some ways. Hey, would you pray, Pastor? Would you pray for the meal? And I'm like, no, you pray, right? You say you're a Christian, you pray. But I don't know the right way to do it. Like, you're already wrong, because there ain't a right way to do it. What are you talking about, the right way? I don't know the right way to pray. Talk to him, right? Just talk to God. What do you mean the right way to pray? There's no right way to pray. I don't know how to do it. There's no protocol. There's no jumping through hoops. There's no how many in the religious. There's none of that. None of that works. None of that's effectual. Well, I don't know how to do it the right way. There isn't a right way. But she's picked up some jargon. She's picked up a thing here. And she wants to be really careful about approaching him the right way and saying the right words and respecting him in the right kind of way. And the interesting thing is that Jesus ignores that entirely. He would much rather her be sincere than to be right. He would much rather her come to him than try to approach him in the perfectly right religious way, especially if the right religious way has nothing to do with her. That's not her. She picked that up from somewhere else. She's saying something that somebody else would have said. It's not her. So you see there in verse 23, he answered her, not a word. Could you imagine the scene here, by the way, right? She interrupts the thing. Somebody allows her in the room. She comes and makes this impassioned plea, and Jesus holds his tongue. He doesn't reply back. Now, this feels somewhat disrespectful, right? Maybe even somewhat impolite on Jesus' part. Well, you answer the poor woman. You got to say something. In the air, there's tension, right? And Jesus wants that to hang in the air. Now, just let me make the simple point that sometimes when we come to Jesus, he doesn't always answer us right away, right? One of the tests of the genuineness of our faith in making requests is if we will keep making requests even when we don't have the answer right away, right? Some of us, again, did you pray about that? Yes, I prayed about that. 15 minutes. I gave it a good solid 15 minutes. I prayed about that seriously for 15 minutes. Well, it may have to take a little bit longer than that. A day? 2? Well, how about a couple of weeks? Month? Years? Right? The sincerity of the request is actually oftentimes seen in the ability or the desire to keep making the request. Now, this is her daughter. No doubt as long as that daughter lives, she's going to make that request. She's not getting away from that. It's not going to forget about that, right? That is on her heart. And Jesus knows that, obviously. She's not going anywhere. He's not disregarding her, right? He's just drawing this out a little bit to teach some lessons and to draw out genuine faith from her life as well. So verse 23, he answered her not a word. And his disciples came. It seems to be some time has gone by, right? The disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. Now, what happened here? When she goes to Jesus, hey, could you do something for my daughter? And he doesn't answer. Does she start making the rounds to the disciples? Well, you guys can do something, right? I mean, I've heard you guys have done healings too. Could you do something? And they're like, well, if Jesus ain't doing it, I ain't doing it. Like, what are you talking about? The power is his. I don't get to wield this the way I want to. I don't know what to do. And it's starting to drive the disciples crazy. Look, she cries out after us. The only reason why she's crying out after the disciples is because they're with Jesus. If they hadn't been with Jesus, she wouldn't have been crying out after them at all. And their solution, right? Don't you love this about these guys? Their solution to this. Send her away. I can't handle it anymore. It's too much for me. She's aggravating. She's annoying. I can't eat my dinner in peace, right? I'm trying to watch the game. Send her away. Send her away, right? Send her away. She cries out after us. Now, in Luke chapter 2, verse 29, that same phrase is used for the fulfillment of it being the release from the request. All right? There in Luke, let me read it. In Luke chapter 2, there of Simeon, when he actually receives of Christ there in the temple, it says, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, is the phrase. Sending away your servant according to your word. And it's the idea that just basically give her what she wants and then she'll leave us alone. Just give her what she wants. She's making a request. Just do it, then we can finish dinner without having her bother us, is the implication. Send her away, for she cries out after us. Now, this is important because Jesus is not there, and he's not working with her merely to have her daughter healed. That will happen. He will do that. But if he heals her daughter without relating to her, in some ways, it's done no long-term good, right? One of the challenges in and around the church, oftentimes, prayer meetings, prayer times, right? You end up getting on a laundry list of all of the physical needs in people's lives. You know, pray for Aunt Bertha's big toe, pray for this, pray for my, whatever kind of thing. And it's all this laundry list of physical needs. And you realize if Jesus answered all of those physical needs without doing a spiritual work, those people are just going to live longer before they die and go to hell. Like there's more to it than just having a need met. Jesus is going to send this woman back to her home, not just to a healed daughter, but to a healed daughter with a mother who actually knows Jesus. And that will be the truly transformative work in the house, not just a healed daughter, but this woman who now can relate to Jesus from her own heart and life. Well, in verse 24, Jesus answered and said. Now, some people don't like this. There's a lot of debate over this, right? Because it does seem insensitive. It seems like Jesus is almost mocking her in some regards. But listen, in verse 23, the disciples are the ones asking the questions. When he answered and said, I believe that he's answering the disciples. He's not talking to the woman yet. He still hasn't answered her a word, because she hasn't approached him in the way that she needs to, that he can relate to her in the right way, right? Jesus will not deal with us as hypocrites. He will not deal with us as phonies, right? If it's not genuine, if it's not our hearts, he doesn't have any regard for it at all. Can just ignore it entirely. That's the best for us, right? Than him having to judge it, right? At least if he's just ignoring it, he's not calling us a hypocrite or scolding us about it kind of thing, right? He's just kind of letting it go away, which is good. So he's not talking to the woman here, I don't believe. He's still talking to the disciples who've asked the question. And he says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, this is the instructions that Jesus gave them when he sent them out on their first missionary journey, right? Stay in Israeli territory. The cities that you go to, I'll follow in behind you. And that's the way that we're functioning right now. And that was important at that time, right? The gospel extends Jerusalem, Judea, And then it goes into Gentile territory to the ends of the earth, right? It says in Romans chapter 1 and in chapter 2 that the gospel was given to the Jew first, but then also to the Gentile, right? It doesn't diminish the significance of Gentiles to simply establish an order of ministry, right? God still cares about Gentiles. He loves Gentiles, but the order is Jews first and then Gentiles. Now, the problem of the Jewish mindset of this day is they thought Jews first. And that's it. And then, forget it. Gentiles, again, considered by many of the religious leaders of Jesus' day to literally be created by God to be sent to hell so that they could keep the fires of hell burning for all of eternity. Literally what the Jewish religious leaders taught. So if you're a Gentile, that's what they thought of you, right? Fodder, fuel for hell, okay? So he is playing on a stereotype and understanding that these disciples themselves would have. And he says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I wonder, was there like a little glint in his eye? Was there a little like, I wasn't sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Right, God, right? Isn't this how, like, huh? Like, yeah, you agree with me? I agree with you. Like, you get it? There is no doubt things happening behind the scenes not written into the text. And then she came. The remarkable thing here. She was not put off by this mindset. She was not deterred or distracted in any way. Then she came, look, and worshipped him. Which means that she bows on her knees before him, humbling herself and supplicating herself to him, and says, now, no son of David this time, right? The idea of the Messiah as the son of David might have been limited to that kind of mindset. Only Israel, Israel first, Israel primarily, maybe the Gentiles, but really not regard for them at all. She doesn't relate to him now in that regard. It is, Lord, help me. She's a Canaanite, Gentile, now approaching Jesus as a Gentile, as a Canaanite. She's not trying to come through the Jewish door. She's just coming to him directly. Now, let me take notice here in verse 25. This is a woman who has to push through the understanding of the day to come all the way to Jesus. She has to push through stereotypes, traditions. She has to push through gender issues. She's a woman. They're all men. She has to push through race issues. She's a Gentile again. They're Jews. There are so many hurdles that she has to push through, so many things that she has to come to that in our present day are being made the main issues of the issue. And they just simply are not. They just simply are not. These things that people are pushing to the front as the gender issues, race issues, pushing to the front as these kinds of things are not the main issues. And again, it's sad when the church kind of climbs on that and starts to beat those drums or try to fight those kinds of things by getting in the arena and trying to make it what we want it to say instead. Well, it's this, it's not that kind of thing where we're getting into that thing. Those are blind leaders of the blind. Let them alone. Let them alone, right? Our responsibility primarily as believers is to help people come directly to God. And oftentimes that will require an encouragement. Yes, I know you've not been treated well, but God is good and he's willing to save you. And it actually may be your disability and disadvantage that actually may help you to see and know God better than somebody who thinks that they are in the right or in the power position. So use that, benefit from it, allow it to be a blessing in your life. I know you were mistreated. I know you were hurt. I know these things came up, but it may be that those things are the thing that allows you to actually come to God with a genuine heart. It actually may be to your benefit, to your blessing.
All right, we learned that this woman refused to be deterred. She didn't argue theology or appeal to tradition or try to enter through a door that wasn't hers. She simply came to Jesus, kneeling, humbling herself and crying out, Lord, help me. And that's the invitation this passage leaves with us. Are we willing to come to Him the same way? Directly, humbly, and in faith. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for joining us again. This is the Word for the Valley podcast. So long, everyone.